Okay. That said, I mean, if a war really broke out over the Taiwan Strait, how would you compare the dynamics of a possible military conflict between Taiwan and China to that of Ukraine and Russia?
Well, I think again the biggest difference is one is the terrain. I mean, one is land border and they touch each other, and so it's much easier to amass forces, and so that's the big difference. Whereas in the China-Taiwan scenario, you have this 100-mile Taiwan Strait, a lot of water. I mean, when we look back at the invasion of Normandy from Britain, that's a 26-mile English Channel. So we're talking about something that's 4 times as long. But what's different today is the fact that the Chinese have a very large strategic rocket force with thousands of missiles that can strike down on known Taiwan targets. And the Chinese, as we've seen, have built up their naval and air force capacity to be able to establish air superiority and then to have the kinds of fleet that would be necessary to launch an invasion. Now, there's a lot of questions still in some circles about whether or not the Chinese Navy has enough amphibious ships to conduct the lift. But as we saw in the last week, we've seen some leaked audio from an alleged meeting in Guangdong concerning what that province would do to mobilize its civilian population to help support an amphibious landing. Now, I know that the document's been called into question in certain circles, but my read of it, and I read the 18 pages of the transcript, my read of it is that there's elements of truth in that. When the Chinese Communist Party decides that it's time to conduct this invasion, it won't just be a conventional force against a conventional force. It will be the people's war of the PRC against Taiwan. And my concern for the people in Taiwan is it doesn't appear that the people and the populace of Taiwan is really sensing how serious this is. For instance, this last week, you had, I think 2 or 3 days ago, you had the PLA sent 30 combat aircraft into Taiwan's air defense identification zone. We all were paying attention that follow this here in the United States and other areas. But from what I've heard, it wasn't very much publicized or front page news in Taiwan, as if it wasn't really something important. It was, in fact, I was told, and from what I've read, is that the crash of an ROC Air Force training aircraft that killed, unfortunately, a Taiwan Air Force pilot, that seemed to have garnered more attention and criticism from the press in Taiwan than the fact that the PRC had sent 30 aircraft into their air defense identification zone. And, holding your military accountable for training disasters is important. But clearly, when the PRC is probing you on a daily basis and they send a large contingency of aircraft, that should have everyone in Taiwan's attention, not just President Tsai Ing-wen and her administration, but it should have the people of Taiwan saying, what's happening and what are we doing to help defend ourselves?
If you were a senior Chinese general, at this point, would you suggest Xi Jinping take Taiwan by force or not because of how the war has turned out in Ukraine?
If I was a PLA general, I would be telling, General Secretary Xi, here's what we know about what has occurred in the Ukraine. Here's where the Russians made mistakes. Here's how we have overcome those mistakes. And you, President Xi Jinping, General Secretary Xi Jinping, you gave me an order, and many times, and previously Hu Jintao gave us orders to be prepared to take Taiwan as early as 2020. So if I'm the general and I've been given that order, I'm going to come back and tell my boss how I can achieve that order. And these other things that you mentioned, those will be considered by the Central Military Commission and by the Communist Party and the Politburo, and they will do what they call comprehensive national power and scientific development, and they will look at all these factors as they choose their timelines for when they want to act. But if I'm a PLA general, I don't think from what I've seen in the Ukraine is going to deter me from telling my boss that I have the means and wherewithal to be able to launch an attack against Taiwan. And I would tell you, if I was a Chinese general, I would say, you know, it looks like the people of Ukraine, they have a much different kind of attitude towards fighting than we see from their counterparts in Taiwan. Everything that our intelligence says, if I was a general, Chinese general, I'd say everything that our intelligence says is that the people of Taiwan are not really considering this a credible threat, and they don't have a civil defense structure in place. They don't have a reserve component that's really ready and capable. They don't have a national, as I said, a civil defense system whereby people are armed and trained and know how to use their arms, know where to go to get their arms and ammunition in the event of a conflict. There's been no set aside of a national reserve of food and other staples that would require a nation to survive while under attack. And so I would say that if I was a Chinese general, I'd say, hey, the Taiwans are not the Ukrainians. They're going to fold. That's what we think. And if we apply these other lessons that Putin didn't do, like killing and taking out the leadership immediately, shutting off all social media so that they cannot get their message out to the world, and then dramatically inflicting serious damage on key military targets instead of trying to inch your way in, I think these are things that the Chinese general would say to General Secretary Xi Jinping.
Captain Fanell, these are all my questions. Do you have anything else to add?
No, I have nothing else. Thank you. Appreciate the dialogue and discussion. And I really hope the people of Taiwan realize that by defending yourself, you're not bringing a war on you. You're just defending yourself. And when you do that and you show that you were willing to stand up and to defend yourself, I think that's the one thing to add. What changed the NATO mindset and the mindset of America about what was going on in the Ukraine war? Well, if President Zelensky had fled Ukraine, do you think that NATO would have said, "Oh, let's send supplies in"? They wouldn't have.
Right.
So there's an incentive there, an additional incentive, which is to say, when you stand up and show that you're willing to fight for your own nation, then other nations that are like-minded will say, well, if they're willing to fight, then we're going to help them. That's what good people do with their friends and neighbors.
Thanks, Captain.
All right. Thank you very much, Simone. My pleasure.